5 million people visited Wisconsin Dells last year and spent $2 billion, and almost none of them saw the thing the place is named for. The Dells, the actual Dells, the ancient sandstone canyons carved by a catastrophic glacial flood, still exist. They rise 100 feet above the Wisconsin River, dark and narrow and strange, close enough that you could touch both walls in some passages. But 2 miles from those cliffs, inside a casino lobby, the rock formations have been rebuilt in cement. Plastic ferns, fake waterfalls, wire-strung birds hanging from the ceiling. The whole scene sliced in half by an escalator. That replica gets more foot traffic in a week than the real thing gets in a month. How a town built to celebrate one of the most dramatic natural landscapes in the Midwest became a place where you can spend an entire vacation without ever seeing the landscape, that's a story about a photograph, a crooked railroad man, a drowned canyon, a lake that vanished overnight, and a $2 billion industry that consumed the thing that created it. The city wasn't even called Wisconsin Dells until 1931. Before that, it was Kilbourn City, named by and for a man named Byron Kilbourn, who was exactly the kind of person who names cities after himself. Born in Connecticut in 1801, Kilbourn was a surveyor, a railroad builder, a politician, and a spectacularly aggressive self-promoter. He helped found Milwaukee, literally one of its 3 founding settlements. When Solomon Juneau, a French-Canadian fur trader who'd settled the east bank of the Milwaukee River, tried to cooperate with Kilbourn on developing the city, Kilbourn refused. He wanted his own side, his own town, his own name on everything. He served as Milwaukee's mayor twice, pushed Wisconsin's first railroad into existence, and built a line from Milwaukee to La Crosse that cut across the southern part of the state. In 1857, Kilbourn decided the railroad needed a bridge over the Wisconsin River. The spot he chose was a stretch of narrow sandstone gorges where the river ran deep between towering canyon walls. A small settlement grew at the crossing. He named it Kilbourn City. He would not enjoy that honor for long. In 1858, an investigation revealed that Kilbourn had orchestrated one of the worst corruption scandals in Wisconsin's young history. Over $631,000 in railroad bonds, something like $20 million today, had been used to bribe state legislators for land grants. The bonds were placed directly on lawmakers' desks, a gesture so brazen it barely qualifies as bribery. It was more like a purchase order. The scandal tainted nearly every member of the legislature. Kilbourn's railroad collapsed. His political career was finished. He left Wisconsin for Jacksonville, Florida, claiming he needed relief for his arthritis. He died there in 1870 and was buried far from either of the cities he'd put his name on. It took 128 years before anyone thought to bring his remains back to Milwaukee. But Kilbourn had picked his railroad crossing well. What he probably didn't care about, and what matters enormously to this story, is that the land around those gorges belonged to someone. The Ho-Chunk Nation had lived in and around the sandstone formations for thousands of years. They called the place Neesh-Hakisuk, rocks close together. The canyons weren't scenery to them. They were home, woven into creation stories, spiritual practice, and daily survival. In the decades before Kilbourn arrived, a series of brutal government-ordered removals had forced Ho-Chunk families west of the Mississippi. Descendants later called it the Wisconsin Trail of Tears. Many Ho-Chunk refused to stay gone. They came back again and again, reclaiming the land they'd been driven from. By the time tourists started arriving, the official story was that the Dells were wilderness, an untouched natural wonder waiting to be discovered. That story required erasing the people who'd been there for millennia. What the gorges actually were, geology aside, was astonishing. 500 million years ago, the area had been the sandy shore of an ancient sea. The sand hardened into stone. Then, during the last ice age, an enormous glacial lake, roughly the size of Utah's Great Salt Lake and about 150 feet deep, had been held back by a wall of ice. When the ice dam failed, the flood was catastrophic. Unimaginable volumes of water carved through the sandstone in a geological instant, leaving behind the formations visible today. Towering rock pillars, side canyons barely wider than a person, cliff faces sculpted into shapes so alien they looked designed by something other than water. Lumber raftsmen floating timber downriver were the first outsiders to see them. Then the railroad brought tourists, and by the 1850s, newspapers were describing the scenery as possessing a wild grandeur and majestic beauty, unlike anything else in the West. Among those early visitors, one man saw something nobody else had figured out how to show. His name was Henry Hamilton Bennett. He went by H.H. He'd been a carpenter before the Civil War, but an accidental gun discharge during his service with the 12th Wisconsin Infantry mangled his right hand, 3 fingers destroyed. He couldn't hold a hammer anymore. So, with help from his uncle George Houghton, a Civil War camp photographer who'd taught him the basics, Bennett bought a tintype studio in Kilbourn City and started carrying his camera into those canyons. What Bennett brought back was extraordinary. His photographs made the sandstone gorges look like another planet. Brooding towers of misshapen rock with fir trees sprouting from their tops, surrounded by dark, still water. Sometimes a lone canoe appeared, a trace of human presence that only deepened the emptiness. He named the formations himself: Stand Rock, Chimney Rock, Sugar Bowl, Witch's Gulch, Romance Cliff, the Demon's Anvil. He sometimes whitewashed the inside of caves so they'd show up better on his negatives. He cleared trees for better vantage points. He gave the wilderness a vocabulary, and then he sold it. Bennett built his own cameras from scratch, constructing everything except the lenses. He invented a portable darkroom he could haul into the woods. He designed a revolving solar printing house to mass-produce images. And he developed a stop-action shutter, a device he called the snapper, that could freeze motion in ways no camera had managed before. In 1886, he used it to take the most famous photograph in Wisconsin history. His 17-year-old son, Ashley, leaping across a 5.5-foot chasm to the top of Stand Rock, frozen in midair against the sky. The image was so sharp, so impossible-looking, that people accused Bennett of faking it. He hadn't. He'd just invented a way to see what the human eye couldn't hold. His studio has the outtakes. Ashley made the jump multiple times, over and over, before his father got the shot he wanted. Any parent reading that detail understands something about H.H. Bennett that no biography needs to spell out. He printed that photograph on stereoscopic cards, twin images that, when viewed through a handheld device, produced a 3-dimensional effect. Victorian parlors from Boston to New York suddenly contained the Wisconsin Dells. Families who'd never left their neighborhoods peered into wooden viewers and saw sandstone canyons rendered in startling depth. Bennett's operation was enormous. At peak production, his printing house was turning out 75,000 stereoscope cards a month. He was selling not just images, but an experience, a virtual visit to a place most Americans would never reach. He was, in every meaningful sense, the first influencer in Wisconsin tourism. And the tourists came, by the trainload. Steamboats like the Medaka Wanda and the Dell Queen began running through the canyons in 1873. Hotels went up along Broadway. By the 1890s, Kilbourn City had a full tourist economy, and Bennett was its engine. Bennett also photographed the Ho-Chunk people who still lived in the area. These portraits are complicated, staged sometimes, with Bennett directing poses and occasionally requesting costumes the subjects refused to wear. His workbooks show payments ranging from 70 cents to a few dollars per session, roughly what he paid his assistants. The photographs themselves are arresting, but they exist within a strange transaction. The man whose images drew tourists to a landscape that had been taken from the people he was photographing. Some Ho-Chunk families found ways to participate in the tourism economy on their own terms. They performed dances along the riverbank for passing tour boats. Over time, this evolved into the formalized Stand Rock ceremony, which ran from 1919 all the way to 1997. Some elders led their own riverboat tours. Others ran what were essentially living history camps, walking visitors through daily tasks and traditional practices. These arrangements were economically necessary and culturally fraught. Acts of survival dressed as entertainment. When the handheld Kodak camera arrived in the 1890s, letting tourists take their own vacation photos, Bennett adapted. His portrait sales dropped 63% between 1897 and 1905. But he pivoted to merchandise, selling souvenirs, postcards, and what he described as Indian relics, some purchased from Ho-Chunk friends, others manufactured. He was always selling, always finding the next format for the same canyon. But Bennett was also becoming the canyon's defender. Late in his career, he learned that the Southern Wisconsin Power Company, led by a Madison entrepreneur named Magnus Swenson, planned to dam the Wisconsin River right at the Dells. The dam would raise water levels 17 feet in the upper Dells, drowning caves and rock formations Bennett had spent decades photographing. He organized opposition. He argued passionately that the town's future lay in the beauty of its canyons, not in manufacturing. The town, he believed, would never become a great industrial center. Its destiny was in the Dells. He lost. The majority wanted the dam. They wanted modernization. They wanted electricity. The Kilbourn Dam was built between December 1906 and August 1909, designed by the engineer Daniel W. Meade and constructed by Bates and Rogers of Chicago. It was massive, 55 feet tall, 350 feet long, the largest hydroelectric station west of Niagara Falls when it was finished. The cost was roughly $2.4 million, something like $75 million in today's money. It generated 10 megawatts and split the river in two, creating an upper Dells and a lower Dells that could no longer be traveled by the same steamboat. And the water rose. Caves vanished. Rock formations that Bennett had spent his life naming and photographing sank beneath the new water line. Scenic passages that had drawn visitors from across the country were swallowed by 17 feet of dark water. H. Bennett died in 1908. He did not live to see the dam completed. The historical marker at the dam site says it plainly. Bennett passionately objected to the dam's construction. The year it was built, he died. Whether the timing was coincidence or something harder to name, nobody has ever quite settled. His studio on Broadway survived. His family kept printing from his glass plate negatives for another 90 years, selling images of formations that were already underwater to tourists who would never see them the way he had. The Wisconsin Historical Society acquired the studio in 1999 and reopened it as a museum in 2000. Today, it's the oldest continuously operated photography studio in the United States. Inside, you can look at glass negatives of canyons that no longer exist above the waterline, and prints of caves that haven't been dry since 1909. Bennett's camera preserved what his activism couldn't save. The dam didn't bring the factories its supporters had promised. Few manufacturers moved in to leverage the water power. The project wasn't even initially profitable. The Southern Wisconsin Power Company had to build a second, larger dam downstream at Prairie du Sac, beginning in 1911, just to make the economics work. The company was eventually sold to Wisconsin Power and Light in 1917. The great industrial future the dam was supposed to unlock never arrived. But the tourists kept coming year after year in growing numbers, and what they came for was quietly changing. The first Leroy Gates had seen that coming decades earlier. Gates was a raft pilot who'd floated lumber down the Wisconsin River for years. When the railroad made lumber rafts obsolete, Gates reinvented himself as a tour guide, taking visitors through the canyons in small boats, telling stories about the rocks, carving his name into a cliff wall that still bears it today. He was the first person to understand that the river's future wasn't in moving timber, but in moving people. What Gates couldn't have predicted was that eventually the people wouldn't need the river at all. The name change tells the story. In 1931, the town officially renamed itself Wisconsin Dells because tourists searching for the Dells couldn't find Kilbourn City on a map. The rebrand was practical. It was also prophetic. The brand was becoming bigger than the place. George Crandall, a conservationist who loved the Dells, saw the direction things were heading. He purchased roughly 1,200 acres of land along the river, restored and reforested them, and then donated it all with a single stipulation: it could never be developed. That land is why the rock formations along the upper Dells are still visible today. Without Crandall's purchase, the canyon walls might be lined with hotels. But outside his protected land, the transformation accelerated. The automobile ended the era of week-long vacations. When visitors arrived by train, they stayed for days. They played croquet and checkers. They went on picnics and attended magic lantern shows at Bennett's studio. But when families started driving up from Chicago and Milwaukee for weekend getaways in the 1940s and 50s, the economics shifted. A 2-day visit needs constant entertainment. The river wasn't enough. New businesses lined U.S. Highway 12 between downtown Wisconsin Dells and the neighboring village of Lake Delton. Go-kart tracks, miniature golf, wax museums, haunted houses, gift shops selling rubber tomahawks and lacquered wood planks of Jesus. The strip grew and grew, and the center of gravity drifted from the river toward the road. In 1927, a Chicago building contractor named William Newman had dammed Dell Creek to create Lake Delton, a 267-acre man-made lake designed purely to attract resort development. It worked. And in 1952, it attracted something else. A Chicago radio personality named Tommy Bartlett, who set up a water ski thrill show on that artificial lake. Bartlett was a showman's showman. His performers wore patriotic swimsuits, formed human pyramids on water, and performed aerial stunts. The shows had absolutely nothing to do with the natural landscape. No sandstone, no canyons, no geological history. Pure spectacle, and people loved it. Bartlett had seen a water ski show at a World's Fair and decided on the spot to create his own traveling version, buying surplus equipment from the performers. His Tommy Bartlett Water Ski and Jumping Boat Thrill Show toured the country. When the tour stopped at Wisconsin Dells in 1952, the local Chamber of Commerce begged him to stay. He agreed. He kept one show running daily on Lake Delton, while 4 additional road groups toured cities across America, performed at World's Fairs, even did USO shows. Tommy Bartlett bumper stickers appeared on cars throughout the Midwest. His billboards stretched across state lines. There is a detail about Bartlett that captures everything. Despite creating and running one of the most famous water ski shows in the world for decades, he apparently only water skied once in his life, on his 70th birthday, 32 years after founding the show. He was not a man who did things. He was a man who made things happen. He understood that the Dells didn't need more nature. It needed a reason for families to sit down, stay for 90 minutes, and be entertained. In 1978, Bartlett named Tom Deal, a man who joined the organization in 1967 at the recommendation of NFL quarterback Joe Namath, of all people, as president, and sold him a quarter stake. Deal would run the show for decades. By the time Tommy Bartlett died in 1998, his combined shows had been seen by 50 million spectators. He'd shifted the axis of the entire town. Before Bartlett, the entertainment was the landscape. After Bartlett, the entertainment was entertainment. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The 1950s brought an arms race of roadside oddities, and this is where Wisconsin Dells became Wisconsin Dells. Not the canyons, not the river, but the Strip. Melvin Flath opened Storybook Gardens in 1956 on a 10-acre parcel between the Army Ducks Depot and what would eventually become Noah's Ark. People questioned his location, rural, out of the way, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Flath was ahead of his time. That stretch of Highway 12 would become the most heavily trafficked tourist corridor in Wisconsin. His park had colorful gardens, 4 ponds named after his granddaughters, life-sized fairy tale characters, Humpty Dumpty, Cinderella, the 3 bears, and a ship-shaped entrance called the Good Ship Lollipop. It was designed explicitly for Kodak moments. Families posed their children next to painted scenes and clicked. The pictures went home to Minneapolis, to Des Moines, to Peoria. The Wonder Spot crammed optical illusions into an unassuming cabin on the highway, where gravity seemed to work sideways. Balls rolled uphill. People leaned at impossible angles. The physics were simple. The building was constructed at a tilt on a sloped hillside, but the experience felt genuinely disorienting in a way that delighted children and confused their parents. Fort Dells offered frontier nostalgia. Xanadu, a space-age concept house, billed itself as the home of tomorrow, cramming futuristic tech and toys for adults and kids into a single building. Biblical gardens displayed manger scenes and multiple crucifixion tableaux, a destination that must have made for interesting car conversations on the ride home. These attractions were cheap, strange, cheerfully tacky, and deeply beloved precisely because they were one of a kind, homemade, particular, the kind of places that couldn't exist anywhere else because they'd been dreamed up by someone local who had an idea and a piece of highway frontage. Every Midwestern family that visited the Dells in the 60s and 70s can name at least 2 of them from memory, and probably describes them to their grandchildren with a wistfulness usually reserved for childhood pets. But water was coming for all of it. In 1977, a place called Sir Gooney's poured some concrete grooves into a hillside off Highway 12 and called it a water slide. You needed a sliding mat to keep the rough surface from skinning your knees and elbows. It was humble. 2 years later, in 1979, a family named Waterman bought 200 feet of highway frontage, the site of the old Delton Outdoor Theater, the area's drive-in, and built bumper boats and go-karts. They called it Noah's Ark. Today, it sprawls across 70 acres with 51 water slides, 5 million gallons of water, and 3 miles of ride track. It is the largest outdoor water park in America. Then came the idea that rewrote the economics of Wisconsin Dells entirely. In 1989, the Polynesian Resort enclosed its water park, put a roof on it, heated the air to 84 degrees. An indoor water park in Wisconsin, a state where winter lasts 5 months and the wind chill can hit 40 below. Families didn't have to come in summer anymore. They could come in January. They could come during a blizzard. The off-season, the great weakness of every cold climate tourist town, simply vanished. The model caught fire with a speed that stunned even the people who'd invented it. Think about the business logic for a moment. An outdoor water park in Wisconsin operates maybe 4 months a year, Memorial Day to Labor Day, weather permitting. An indoor water park operates 12 months, every day, rain or snow or 40 below wind chill. That doesn't just add revenue, it transforms the entire cost structure. Hotels that used to sit empty from October through April could now sell rooms at peak rates in February. Restaurants that boarded up for winter stayed open. The property tax base expanded. The labor force went from seasonal to year-round. Every resort owner in the Dells saw the Polynesians' numbers and understood immediately. Within a few years, developers were racing to build the biggest, most elaborate indoor water park in the Dells, and the numbers got staggering. The Wilderness Resort built 8 separate water parks, 4 indoor, 4 outdoor, spread across 600 acres, with 500,000 combined square feet of water attractions, making it the largest indoor-outdoor water park resort in the country. Great Wolf Lodge, a chain that actually started right in Lake Delton in 1997, built themed family hotels with indoor water parks attached. Mount Olympus, which opened in 1990 as Big Chief's Go-Kart World, expanded into a 102-acre complex with an outdoor water park, an indoor water park, 5 roller coasters, and 9 go-kart tracks under an ancient Greece theme. And then there was Kalahari. Its founder, a Dells area native, had started over 19 businesses in his life, selling Christmas trees, running a pizza restaurant, before a family trip to South Africa gave him a vision. He opened the Kalahari Resort with a 125,000 square foot indoor water park wrapped in an African theme, with carved doors imported from Africa, an indoor surf ride using 50,000 gallons of water per minute, and a ride designed to simulate the experience of being flushed down a giant toilet bowl. The resort complex included Tom Foolery's Adventure Park, a 110,000 square foot indoor theme park with carnival rides, mini-golf, bowling, and an arcade. 756 hotel rooms, a full spa, a convention center. Families could check in on Friday and check out on Sunday without ever stepping outside. Between 1995 and 2014, the number of hotel rooms in the Dells area tripled, from roughly 3,000 to 10,000. The Tourism Board's annual marketing budget quadrupled from about $2 million to over $8 million, funded largely by a resort room tax. And it worked. By 2024, 58% of all visitor spending in Wisconsin Dells was happening outside the summer peak, a stunning number for a Midwestern vacation town. The Dells had broken the calendar. The cost was everything that had made it the Dells. One by one, the old attractions died. The Wonder Spot was demolished in 2006 to make room for a road expansion. 50 years of gravity-defying weirdness bulldozed. Parts were supposedly sent to the State Historical Society. Storybook Gardens, open since 1956, closed in 2010 after its final operator acknowledged that a new generation of visitors had different interests. The owner asked for permission to burn the good ship Lollipop rather than pay to tear it down. The faded fiberglass Humpty Dumpty, the Three Bears, Little Bo Peep, all sold at auction. Fort Dells, gone. Biblical Gardens, gone. Xanadu, the House of the Future, no longer had one. In online forums and Facebook groups, older visitors recite these names like a liturgy of loss. They remember the sound effects artist at the Tommy Bartlett show, a man named Wes Harrison who could reproduce any sound with his voice, engines, animals, machinery, music, and who made the crowd laugh harder than the skiers did. They remember buying a new doll every summer at Storybook Gardens and still having those dolls somewhere. They remember the T-Rex tail near the river that always seemed terrifyingly close when you were 8 years old, torn down over 20 years ago, replaced by a mini golf course. They remember the supper clubs and the Showboat Saloon and the feeling of a town that had character because its attractions were built by characters, not by corporations calculating return on investment per square foot. It's all about making money hand over fist now, one Facebook commenter wrote. Greed is killing the Dells. The geographer John Fraser Hart had written essentially the same thing back in 1984, calling the Dells either a showplace of tourist attractions or the kind of place that gives tourism a bad name, depending on your point of view. That was before the indoor water parks even existed. The Dells television commercials document the transformation with accidental precision. In 1982, an ad showed a stressed-out woman escaping city traffic to discover nature, river tubing, boat tours, cliff hikes. By the early 2000s, the ad showed nothing but water parks. The Tourism Board introduced a mascot, an anthropomorphic inner tube named Tubi. The campaign tagline was, "You'll never look at water the same way again," which is essentially what H. Bennett had promised in the 1880s. Except Bennett meant the Wisconsin River, and the ad meant a chlorinated wave pool kept at 84 degrees by an industrial heating system. And then the lake vanished. On the morning of June 9th, 2008, after several days of relentless rain, saturated soil beneath a 500-foot section of Highway A, the narrow strip of land separating man-made Lake Delton from the Wisconsin River, collapsed. 600 million gallons of water poured through the breach. The flood carved a channel 700 feet long, 370 feet wide, and 30 feet deep. In a matter of hours, Lake Delton, the artificial lake William Newman had built in 1927, the lake where Tommy Bartlett's water skiers had performed for over 50 million people, was gone. Just mud, dead fish, exposed lake bottom in every direction. 5 homes were ripped from their foundations and swept into the river. Remarkably, nobody died, but the images were devastating. Tommy Bartlett's water ski stage sat on dry mud, pleasure boats listed on their sides in muck, resort docks pointed at open air. The disaster hit at the worst possible moment, the very start of summer tourism season. Cancellations poured in. Small resort owners sat on their empty beaches watching the emptiness. One woman tossed bread to a lone duck where the lake used to be. A massive collaborative effort between the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, the Department of Natural Resources, the Federal Highway Administration, Sauk County, and the village of Lake Delton began in August 2008. They filled the breach, rebuilt the highway on a more substantial base, and let Dell Creek slowly refill the basin. By Memorial Day 2009, less than a year after the catastrophe, Lake Delton was back. Boats were in the water. Resorts reopened. Tourism bounced back. But something had been revealed that couldn't be unrevealed. The most important body of water in Wisconsin's $2 billion tourism economy was a man-made lake, 81 years old, held in place by a road built on sand. When the sand got wet enough, the lake simply left. 600 million gallons of water had chosen the path of least resistance, and no amount of marketing budget could have stopped it. The big indoor water parks barely blinked. Their water came from municipal systems, not from Lake Delton. It was the old-style resorts, the ones along the lake shore, the ones with docks and beaches and views of the water ski show that took the real hit. The lake drained, and it took the last traces of the old Dell's economy with it. Tommy Bartlett's show survived the draining of its lake. It didn't survive the pandemic. COVID restrictions on large gatherings forced the cancellation of the entire 2020 summer season, the first time in 68 years that skiers hadn't performed on Lake Delton. On September 16, 2020, Tom Deal, the president who'd run the show since Tommy Bartlett had tapped him back in 1978, released a statement. It is with great sadness that we announce the Tommy Bartlett Show will not be able to make a comeback in 2021 as we had hoped. After 69 years, we are permanently shuttering the business. They couldn't absorb a full season of zero revenue and couldn't bear the financial risk of planning another. The indoor water park resorts had reserves, corporate backing, diversified revenue streams. A live outdoor show that ran 4 months a year had none of that. In May 2025, the 37 acres, including 827 feet of highway frontage and 1,500 feet of Lake Delton shoreline, where generations of Midwestern families had watched ski pyramids glide past, were sold to Ripley's Believe It or Not. Today, Wisconsin Dells generates a total economic impact of $2.05 billion a year. Tourism supports more than 12,000 jobs in an area whose permanent population is just under 3,000. Noah's Ark covers 70 acres. Kalahari has announced yet another expansion, a $76 million indoor water park addition. The Rise of Icarus at Mount Olympus stands 145 feet tall, billed as America's tallest water slide. Walk the Strip, and it looks like a carnival that forgot to leave town. Upside-down buildings, haunted houses, dinosaur-themed mini-golf, endless fudge shops. Locals talk about it with a familiar mixture of economic gratitude and aesthetic exhaustion. They know a family of 4 can burn through hundreds of dollars a day on experiences that feel mass-produced. They also know those families pay the taxes. The environmental cost of all this water is a question the big resorts have been less eager to discuss. Indoor water parks consume massive amounts of energy to maintain that 84-degree climate year-round. The privately held companies that own most of the resorts haven't been particularly transparent about their energy consumption, even as they've disclosed water usage. The Dells has absorbed its enormous water demands relatively easily. There's abundant fresh water in the region. But rising summer temperatures have increased drought risk, and even the Great Lakes, one of the world's largest freshwater reserves, have seen water levels dip below historic averages in recent years. Many locals, when they want to actually enjoy where they live, drive 30 minutes to Devil's Lake State Park with its real quartzite bluffs and real swimming, or to Mirror Lake State Park for quiet canoeing, or to Pewett's Nest, a narrow sandstone gorge with a waterfall that almost no tourists ever discover. The irony is the kind that doesn't need explaining. People who live in the waterpark capital of the world go somewhere else to enjoy water. The boat tours still run. Several operators navigate the upper and lower dells, motoring through the same canyons Bennett photographed, past the same cliff faces that Ho-Chunk families called home for millennia before a government removed them. On the Upper Dells tour, a dog still leaps to the top of Stand Rock, a tradition recreating Bennett's famous photograph of his son Ashley's jump, performed daily for the tour boats since the 1960s. It's the closest most visitors get to the thing that started everything. A tour guide named Harlan Felt put it simply: water parks are good for the economy, they certainly attract people, but they sometimes pull people away from the natural aspects. Some visitors come to Wisconsin Dells and probably have no idea that any of this is here. There have been small signs of a turn back toward the land. The Tourism Board opened Elm Street Plaza downtown in 2022, a public gathering space with live music, seating, and local art. A new attraction called Land of Natura bills itself as the largest inflatable water park in America, but it operates outdoors on a man-made lake, with its founders talking about the trend toward nature-based attractions. Some resorts, like Chula Vista, actively promote the boat tours and river cruises to their guests, even though sending visitors off campus hurts their own bottom line. Whether any of this represents a genuine shift or just another iteration of the same pattern, nature as marketing angle, remains to be seen. Kalahari's $76 million indoor expansion suggests the water park model's imperial march is far from over. H. Bennett's studio still stands on Broadway in downtown Wisconsin Dells, a small wooden building, quiet now on a street that was once the beating heart of the whole operation. Inside are glass plate negatives that hold images of caves now 17 feet underwater, rock formations that disappeared when the dam went in, a canyon system people crossed the country to see before anyone had heard of a water slide. Bennett had fought the dam because he believed the town's future was in the dells themselves, in the beauty, in the strangeness of what the river had carved. He died thinking he'd lost that fight. 117 years later, 16 million gallons of water circulate through the indoor water parks of Wisconsin Dells on any given day, heated and filtered and pumped through plastic slides inside climate-controlled buildings. 2 miles from the nearest wave pool, the Wisconsin River moves through sandstone it has been carving for 15,000 years. The cliffs are still there. The gorges are still narrow enough to touch both walls. Stand Rock still stands, the same formation where a 17-year-old boy jumped into the air in 1886, frozen forever by a camera his father built with a ruined hand. Nobody charges admission to see the river. Almost nobody comes.